Hello again. I suppose that the people with whom I associate in my day to day life might be particularly weird and atypical, but I haven't yet heard a single person who is enthusiastic about being forbidden to see relatives at Christmas. Even those who are very gung ho about saving the NHS and observing strictly social distancing rules back in the spring are starting to grow a little suspicious about the whole coronavirus business. They saw emergency hospitals being built, heard talk of using ice rinks as mortuaries, and listened in horror to the idea that 500,000 people would die of the plague before the end of the year. Despite observing all the rules, putting up with all the inconvenience, the restrictions are growing more severe every month, and everywhere you go, you hear murmurs of discontent. I can think of three excellent explanations for the way that events have been moving. I hardly like to talk about them, though, lest my chuckles and smiles will, as some have asserted here, cause me to act as a gatekeeper and discourage people from knowing or seeking the truth. I will therefore attempt to explain neutrally, without influencing anybody as to my own views about what may be happening. The first explanation is that events are just as they've been represented and that we are in the grip of a deadly plague. The precautions which are being taken are prudent and wise, being for our own good. The second explanation is that the virus is part of some plots to impose a new form of government on us. It was deliberately created and released with no other purpose than to allow some international groups to seize control of our lives and extinguish democracy. The final explanation would be that the coronavirus is just one of those haphazard misfortunes which befall us from time to time. It will cause quite a few very old and ill people to die a few months earlier than they would otherwise have done, but will leave the rest of us unscathed by and large. Governments around the world have reacted to this in hysterical and ill thought out ways, which are liable to inflict a good deal more hardship and harm on their citizens in the long run than if they had done nothing at all. In Britain, the Prime Minister saw an opportunity to be remembered as a great statesman and had the delusion that he could go down in history like his hero, Winston Churchill. He came across differently, of course, to many people. In support of this third possible explanation, I might mention the events at the Chernobyl nuclear reactor in 1986. When it first began malfunctioning, the workers there panicked and began throwing switches on and off and trying all sorts of mad things without thinking them through for a moment. They thus made the situation 10 times worse, although genuinely trying to do their best to deal with the crisis. An American think tank studied Chernobyl and came up with what they said was a strategy which had the best possible chance of preventing such a disaster in the future. This was that when an alarm sounded at a nuclear power station about something going wrong in a reactor, an automatic switch would be triggered which would prevent anybody operating any part of the system for an hour. This meant, well, it would have meant that instead of panicking and running around like headless chickens doing silly and dangerous things, everybody would have had to stop and think for at least an hour before taking any sort of action at all. Had such a system been in place at Chernobyl, it would have saved a lot of trouble, of course. If such a system had prevented anybody reacting to coronavirus for a month or two, it might have been no bad thing, at least by this reading of the situation. I'm not leading readers to adopt any of these three possible views of the pandemic, and I hope that they'll be able to make up their own minds without being influenced either by me or anybody else.